The greatest player in the history of college football, Herschel Walker, became a Georgia Bulldog 40 years ago today, April 6, 1980. Dean Legge from Dog Post, making you a smarter Georgia fan. I did want to talk about Herschel for a little bit. I mean, it's hard to separate Georgia and Herschel. It's hard to, have really what Georgia has been over the last 4 decades without the notion or the memory of Herschel Walker. He was electric. He was the most gifted football player that I've seen play on film, I guess you could say. Live, of course, I was so young. It was such a long time ago. But Herschel means a lot to Georgia because it was the pinnacle of the program, and that was 40 years ago. Maybe binds the relationship between Georgia and Herschel even more. But I mean, you're talking about the best college football player ever to play. I mean, when you talk about what he did while he was at Georgia, the fact that he probably should have won the Heisman at least twice, if not 3 times, the fact that he went pro early, all those things were just part of the legend of Herschel. I mean, he has cultivated it through the years. I mean, he's had 40 years to cultivate this legend even more. But there's no doubt about what he did on the field. I mean, Georgia under Vince Dooley was a good, not great program. Georgia under Vince Dooley with Herschel Walker was the best program in the country. And that's not lost on a lot of insiders. As good as Vince was, and he was very good. He was as good as it was at Georgia in terms of coaches. But even he needed a game-changing player, and that's what you got with Herschel Walker. He was transformational. I mean, everybody wanted to be Herschel when we were growing up, and he was hard to hate. I'm sure there were plenty of Georgia Tech fans and Florida fans and Auburn fans that did not like him. I mean, he went 9-0 against that group. I'm just going off the top of my head. I mean, I think he only lost 3 games in college. So that's kind of hard to pull off. And 2 of those were national championship games, or as close as you could get back then. But he was exceptional, and that he picked Georgia after a really long and drawn-out recruiting process with Southern Cal, Clemson, Auburn, Florida. I mean, everybody was involved. That he picked Georgia at the end makes sense looking back, but there really was, at the time, if you talk to Mike Cavan and people who are from Riceboro, it wasn't so cut and dry necessarily all the time. I mean, he was a huge story, and this was 30 years before the .coms mattered in any way, or 20 years, I should say. So the notion that a high school football player could turn upside down all of college football was, it just didn't, it was hard to imagine. The other thing I want to focus on, I wrote about Herschel 10 years ago in a very deep way. Go to dogpost.com to check that out. But, Herschel didn't have ESPN. Herschel didn't have the ability to play on television every single week. I mean, you think about transformational players that have come along lately, and I would say Tim Tebow, maybe Carson, I can't even remember his name. That means it's not him. So Tim Tebow, Reggie Bush, Tua, to some degree Joe Burrow this past year, certainly Johnny Manziel. Guys like that, they were media creations in a media time. Herschel wasn't that. He was a legend built on, I'm going to use the word myth. There was nothing mythical about it. I mean, as soon as he played, you saw what the hype was about, and they were all right. I mean, he was as close to a 6-star recruit as you could get. And he paid off. I mean, he paid off for Georgia. He paid off for the USFL. The Dallas Cowboys can totally thank Herschel Walker for helping them win multiple Super Bowls in the 90s. That all came from the Herschel Walker trade. I do think to some degree it's sad that he is held up so high because there have been a lot of great Georgia players since then. I mean, just really great Georgia players. But they didn't win the national championship. And many of them didn't win a conference championship. And that's what separated Herschel from them. I mean, this is a guy who never left Athens without winning a conference championship. I mean, how many players in college football history, well, in SEC history, can say, well, I won the conference every single year I played? Herschel can say that. SEC players, that's not common. I mean, that's not normal at all. So he was just such a dominant player. Bo Jackson was in his stratosphere, but Bo Jackson wasn't Herschel. And it's hard to really compare Herschel to guys today because whereas, 40 years ago, you'd never seen anything like Herschel. You couldn't really compare him to other guys. Now everyone gets compared to Herschel, particularly at Georgia. And the only guy that's come close to that is Todd Gurley, I think. I mean, you want to make the case for Garrison Hurst, you can. But I mean the style of play, to some degree the cultural phenomenon. Todd was close to that. But, I mean, there were songs written about Herschel. There were books written about Herschel. Bill Hartman from the CBS News in Atlanta, I mean, that was basically his beat for a while. So it was, where is Herschel Walker going to school? So I just don't know that anything can approach that anymore. Our media is so splintered in many ways. You would never have Dean Legge in the 1980s. I mean, it just wouldn't exist. So now everybody can have their say and so forth. But there's the marketing machine that is ESPN and Fox and all the universities themselves pushing players. You just didn't have that back then. I mean, every single game that Georgia plays is on national television now. Georgia played 3 games on national television in the 1980s when Herschel played. 3. That's it. That's it. So you would have, Georgia, Florida almost every single year. In 1980, it was Georgia, Carolina. And I think, that might be the only 2 in the regular season, and obviously the Sugar Bowl, because I'm not sure that Tech, Georgia, or Auburn, Georgia were on TV. I'm pretty sure they weren't. But you get my point. Those games, that was must-see TV. I mean, who is this Herschel Walker guy? Who is this John Elway, that they're talking about is going to play after 1980 Georgia-Florida game? I mean, who is this? We've heard a lot about this guy. You just don't have that now. And that's another reason why Herschel is so special. And that he's the greatest football player in college football history, that helps too. Right here, I'm going to link you to highlights that Herschel has had through the years. I'd check it out and make sure you click subscribe as well. Click to subscribe, easy for me to say. We're going to get through coronavirus. Make sure you click the video and make sure to subscribe.